Hey everyone, it's Rich at the Mystery School. I wanted to show you, I had my TZ 250 back out of the house and I brought it down here, started working on it. I got invited to go to Laguna Seca this weekend and ride it during a couple parade laps. I believe it's Saturday afternoon. They're going to let a lot of us old racers out on the track with our old super bikes and our old 250 Grand Prix bikes. And so I got my TZ 250 running again, and I wanted to make sure that I checked it over and everything before I went out there. The last time this bike has actually been ridden in a race was in 2007, and I rode the Toyota 200 and the 250/50 down at Willow Springs, and it is the spare bike to a bike that's in the Barber Museum. But I'll tell you what, Yamaha was nice enough to let me keep this bike at home as kind of a memento of all those 250 Grand Prix years. And so I have this very nice example of what a TZ 250 was. So I thought I'd take you around the bike and show you what it's all about. And that way, if you're at Laguna Seca, you'll understand a little bit more about what this type of racing was like. So these bikes were purpose-built race bikes, obviously, no street equipment whatsoever. And in Yamaha's case, they came out in the later years with a V-twin engine. So I'll take you down here and you can kind of see the lower cylinder heads downward like that, and the upper cylinder is actually cradled inside the frame here, and it runs on the left side right here. So you have a V-twin power plant, 125cc cylinders, so it makes it a 250, and then it's got reed valve induction, so it goes through the reed valves here, and there's the carburetor in the top cylinder, and the carburetor for the bottom cylinder faces the opposite way. And it runs down there pointed backwards. So you've got really two completely separate cylinders that take completely different jetting and a real separate tuning to make the bike pull and get the most horsepower it possibly can. So we spent a lot of time trying to figure out the right size jets, and one of the little tricks that we used back in the day was, I'll take you right up here, we had an exhaust gas temperature gauge that we put on, and what this does is this allows us to tell how hot each cylinder is running, and it'll give you a real good clue on where to go rich or lean with your main jets and with your other jets as well. And so you can get the bike running really good if you use a little bit of information like that. And that's wired through the electrical system, and then it comes down and there's a sensor that plugs in right here and goes into the exhaust pipe. There it is right there, and you measure the heat coming out of the exhaust port and you can tune the bike. Also, these bikes are kind of trick. They have a power valve motor, and they have a valve that goes up and down in the exhaust port that will basically fool the motor into thinking it has a lower exhaust port height, and those are run by cables and a little servo motor. The servo motor's up here. And when you're at low RPM, below about 10,500 or 11,000 RPM, the valve is dropped down. And the bike has fairly decent torque to get off the corner. And then as it revs up, the valve lifts and your exhaust port gets higher, and that allows your engine to rev to about 14,000 RPM. So that's kind of how that works. On the other side of the bike, we've got a couple different features here. You've got the other cylinder, and you can see the power valve motor down there. And then back in the old days, KLS was the speed shifter to have. And so you have the little slider there, and that controlled your speed shifting. And then it's wired in up here in the front of the bike, and you have little lights on that box right there, green and red, and that'll tell you when it's going on and off, and you can actually adjust it so you get perfect shifts out of this bike. And it's a funny thing, when I first tried a speed shifter, it was at Laguna Seca, and I didn't want to use one because I'd always done a normal, shifting with backing off the throttle and, just shifting like that. And that part came out and everyone was putting them on, and finally I put one on, and I went a half a second a lap faster with the speed shifter. So from that point on, of course, I was converted, and I had to have it. TZ 250s also, they have a ignition curve switch. You can try different ignition curves. That we mounted right here, and you can see that little knob there, and it looks like we like to run number 3 ignition curve, and we of course dynoed all those different curves, and we like that one the best. Some of this stuff is kind of hard for me to remember, but another thing I liked about 250s was the way, of course, that they handled, and you could see how stout the frame is and how solid everything is mounted. And then the swing arm is just incredible. I mean, it's so strong, and it runs back. They had it bent like that so that the exhaust pipe would clear and you'd have better ground clearance. And then the other side of the swing arm is sort of more conventional looking. As you can see from over here, that's kind of a normal looking swing arm and has a box right there. You might also notice these footpeg plates. I made these special, so this part here for me is a special piece, and I like my footpegs a lot higher than the way they came stock on the bike, and I liked them a lot further forward, and that gave me a better center of gravity on the bike so that I could move back and forth on the seat quickly with a lot less effort. So they look stock, but they're actually moved quite a bit differently than you know, they're in a different position than on the stock bike. And then I used a stock shifter, but I like to space it out a little farther so that when I was leaned off in the corner, I could still grab shifts really easy from that side of the bike when I was hanging off the other side over there. So those are some little things. I had some special handlebars. They're a little bit longer than stock, and you can see I like them pulled back pretty far so I could tuck in really good on the straightaways. And so they're stock bars, but they have a 1-inch extension underneath the grip you can't see. And that 1-inch extension gave me a lot more leverage because I also altered my rake and trail, and I had special crowns made that actually increased the steering abilities of my bike. And I won't go into a whole lot of detail here, but it made it steer a lot heavier. And of course that will be a double-edged sword. You know, it's a little slower through chicanes and flicking back and forth, but it works really good in high-speed corners and it holds its line really well. So I made the bars a little bit wider to kind of compensate for that extra effort I had to put into steering back and forth. So there's a lot of little things that kind of go into making a bike your own. Now, suspension-wise, these things handle so good. You can see how big the forks are. And of course, I used LE suspension for many, many years. When Jim Lindemann was alive, he was the guy at the track, and he would go and he would really help you dial these things in. Most people in 250 Grand Prix used Öhlins forks. I liked the stock forks with the coating that made them really move well. And I had certain valving and springs and everything that Jim set me up in that worked really good for my riding style. And so I was always leery about trying something new because I was like, you know, I like it the way it is, and I was very happy with the way the bike steered, and especially on braking, you know, that's really critical that you get the fork dive the way you want it. And the support under braking. So Lindemann helped me out a lot there. And of course, now Ed Sorbo has taken over for Jim, bought the business. There's my rear shock right there. As you can see underneath there, it's kind of hidden. And so Ed's helping us out at the mystery school a lot now too. But speaking of rear suspension, Öhlins came out with many different versions of shocks, and I would drive Jim crazy because I'm like, I didn't like any of them. I tried them all, but every new shock I just couldn't stand. And so he would convert all my new shocks to all the old valving that I liked. And in some cases, he would remove the top out spring, and we would put together a shock that was a 2000 whatever model shock, but it would have like 1998 or 1994 valving in it, and I would go faster, you know? So a lot of times, you know, new stuff is great, but if you don't adapt well to it or you can't use it, you might want to go back to your old setup. And that's what I would do. For many years, I rode suspension that might be considered old-fashioned, but I was winning races, and so I'm like, why change it, right? So that's kind of how that worked. Let's see, what else can I show you? If I go around this side of the bike, I'd be happy to show you a cassette transmission. Yamaha would provide you a race kit, and inside there would be all kinds of different transmission ratios you could pick from, many different gears for each, each number in the transmission. You'd have 4, 5, 6 second gears to pick from, and so on and so forth. So you could do a lot, and it all comes out in about 15 or 20 minutes from the side there. And so it's very easy to work on, and it's very quick to change gearing and go back out and try it. So you would generally set your wheelbase right here. You would set your wheelbase where you liked it in the swing arm to make the bike handle right. And then you would try to adjust your gearbox gears to kind of compensate for any changes in overall gearing. So sometimes you couldn't get the sprockets just right, and you get the wheelbase close. Sometimes you would get the wheelbase perfect, but the sprockets weren't right, so you'd have to run a little bit taller 6th gear or something like that to compensate. So there was a lot of little stuff that went into that as well. But if you got a bike like this set up well on a racetrack, it would pull hard in every single corner, and it would pull down the straightaway, and it would hit peak RPM 13,800 every straightaway on every part of the track, and that's when you knew you were doing really well. I'll finish up here just showing you the brakes. Now, in the old days, we didn't use stainless steel. We used these cast iron, and these are Brake Tech cast iron rotors. And they're a special diameter that I liked. I didn't like really big rotors. I liked the smallest rotors I could get away with because my bike would turn better. And then I used these Brembo calipers, and I used Ferrotto brake pads that worked well on cast iron. And they had quite a bite, I will tell you. They were very sensitive brakes. And so I would run this master cylinder, and I could stop this thing on the nose with the rear wheel in the air with one finger. And I liked it that way because it didn't take me as much effort. So, you know, each bike that you race, it's amazing the amount of customizing you can do to it to make it fit your body and make it fit your style. And one thing I liked about 250s was they were very adaptable to the rider, and you could create a bike that would just make it magical on the track how fast you could go. And it would be almost like the bike could read your mind, and it would go around the corners just by thinking you wanted to go around the corner, you know? So that was kind of the feel that I always tried to get. Now, my parade laps at Laguna, I don't think they're going to have that kind of, grace and beauty to them, but at least we'll get this bike out there and we'll spin it around and maybe pop a few wheelies on it, and I'll show you what it can do down a straightaway, maybe if they give me a chance. So thanks for listening. I hope that was somewhat interesting and educational. If you don't know anything about 250 Grand Prix bikes, now you do. And hope to see you at Laguna. If you're going, have a safe trip over there, and look for us in the vintage tent. Our bike should be over there. All right, thanks so much. Have a great time. Bye.